Hello, welcome back to another pen talk. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for catching a ride and following me. Today we're going to be taking the train backwards. We're going to do the way back train. And we're going to take a look at some vintage pens from the 1920s from Sheaffer. I have a fair number of vintage. I've collected for like 30 years when I used to go to flea markets and antique shops and things like that and find them for a few dollars. And I bought a lot because for 50 bucks you could walk away with 20 pens. And a lot of them were pretty nice pens. There were a lot of other collectors that were a lot more educated in the pen collecting business. So usually by the time I got to buy it, they've already been picked over, but I still found some that were very interesting to me. And I started restoring them early in the 70s. And this is the pen that started me on this. Let's take a look at these a little bit more closely. It's a white dot. With that clip design, it's probably in the 1925. This is made out of Radite, which they started using in 1924. They made some changes in 26, so that's kind of where I put it. And it does have the owner's name engraved on it. We'll see if we can find out anything about the owner. That classic Sheaffer lever, which they patented and kept a lot of other pen makers from using it. It has a decent amount of nice engraving there on the barrel. A number of dates. The latest is 1914. The cap band shows a lot of wear. I'm certain this pen got a lot of use, and there's a cracking at the bottom of the cap, but not a concern of mine because it doesn't interfere with using the pen. And what really also sets this pen apart is that's a pretty good size nib there. And it does say lifetime on it, but no serial number, which again dates it in the mid-20s instead of the later part of the 20s. Standard comb feed, and these are manifold nibs, stiff nibs. Sheaffer didn't do a lot of flexible nibs or other varieties. You could order the pen with those nibs, but it wasn't something that was standard. So this pen got my attention. Then I found its little brother in my collection. Same material, same lever, but smaller sized. And this has an interesting engraving on it. It's a 530. I don't know whether you can see it there. We'll try to get the light there differently. When we take off the cap, it's about one turn to get the cap off. A lot of modern pen manufacturers could learn from that. And we'll see the nib is also stamped 530. So this was an option to the lifetime pen. So this was a $5 pen with a 30-year warranty. Same comb feed. My understanding is Sheaffer basically made the same pens, except the ones that had the lifetime and the white dot. They charged more money for because of the warranty, and that was maybe $1 or $2. So if this was $5, this one was probably $7, maybe $8. Sheaffer continued to evolve the design. This is one from the later 20s. So the clip is the first giveaway. It's flattened off. It's not round like it was on the earlier models. Same Sheaffer engraved on the clip. The other thing you'll notice is that the engraving on the side has changed a little bit. Gotten rid of the patent. They just says patented. They got rid of all those dates that they had, and the two earlier black pens had the same dates on it. Less than one turn to get the cap off. Nudge, nudge. And here we see stamped on the nib is the 325, so a $3 pen with a 25-year warranty. It's interesting how they positioned that. Same comb feed and same stiff nib. Sheaffer, before they used Radite, which in 24 they made a transition over and they stopped using hard rubber. This is an excellent, well-preserved example of a hard rubber pen Most of the discussions I've seen say they've all had a chase pattern on them, as this one does. That same lever fill. And if we look for the engraving, it's a little bit different. Some more stylized engraving. Brought in a little bit more light that maybe will bring that out. And we'll see those patent dates again. Only the 1914 ones. If we take the cap off, again less than one turn, we'll see a number 2 Sheaffer nib, which is interesting. And we'll do a little test here, which it's a little flexible. So that's pretty nice. Radite also came in black and jade, and this is a jade example. Same white dot, same type of clip, a little bit different clip band on it. And we'll look at what's engraved on the pen. We'll see it's very similar to the black one. In fact, pretty much identical. We'll take off the cap, about 1 1/4 turns, and we'll see a nice large Sheaffer nib there. Lifetime. And they also made Radite in red to probably compete with the red that was Waterman's used and Parker used. And it looks like that was a 2 because there's a plug in the top. It has that old style clip, so this is probably from the mid-20s. Take the cap off and we'll take a look at the nib again. So this says, again, it's 14 karat. It says special. Not exactly certain what's special about it. Notice a small section, very common with vintage. So we're going to dive in a little bit deep. Also some restorations that I did on the 530 pen. And we'll talk a little bit more about history and vintage. So the green jade was very popular in the 20s, and I think it continued on into the 30s. Here is an excellent third-party example of that color. No darkening whatsoever. And the other thing that's nice about this pen is we have a large warranted nib there. They call it a number 6. And an interesting, a little bit bigger section than we get on a lot of pens. So it's a really nice example of an oversized pen. No markings on it to identify the maker. Here's a Parker and a Sheaffer version using that jade coloring. You know, I'm certain that Sheaffer tried to mimic a dual fold design, 2 bands, black at the bottom of the barrel, black at the top of the cap, but the Sheaffer suffered from some type of interaction between the cap liner and that jade. Parker survived a little bit better, but it looks like that sack discolored the celluloid that they were using. From what I've read, there's nothing you can do to recover that. It's just a patina, a sign of age. And Radite is a form of celluloid. And here's another example of a Sheaffer pen. I think they made different versions of this green resin. And as you can see, it ages differently. That's the fun, to me, of vintage, is no two are going to be the same most of the time. They do show age, and as I discussed probably when I was collecting, these are the ones that the people that got there before me decided weren't worth buying, but to me, they were great. So here are 5 Sheaffers for your viewing enjoyment, and they tell a story. These are the 2 early Radite ones. This is the 630, the Lifetime one, and the 325. And here's a Sheaffer No Nonsense pen, which is the first fountain pen that I started using in the 60s. They're $1.98 at the drugstore. Yeah, that ball clip, getting back to that old vintage style. Cap band. No engraving on the barrel. These are injection molded parts. I mean, this was not a expensive pen. Fine nib, plastic feed, Small section, like vintage. And these were cartridges, and you can find converters that fit. Sheaffer went to this very small opening, which I never quite understood. From using these pens when I was in elementary school, I was not a fan of cartridges, and I'm still not a fan of cartridges. So that brings us to the connoisseur, which is the high-end pen that Sheaffer came out with in the mid-80s. And the story is it was based on the no-nonsense pen. So you got a $2 pen and a $100 pen. It took the creator a while to get Sheaffer to accept that they were going to make a $100 pen and sell it. When they finally did in '85, it was a hit. This is the second version of the model. And you can tell because it has script on the cap band. Sheaffer and USA. Unscrew the cap, less than one turn, nudge, nudge. And we see a very nice 18 karat gold nib, which may have been like the first kind of standard 18 karat gold nib that they put into a pen. You know, comb feed on, or I wouldn't call it comb feed, but a nice feed on the back, white dot for lifetime. Some scroll work. It's a substantial pen. It feels good in the hand, good thickness to it, good weight. It's that precious resin feel. Small section, a la vintage. You have a metal band at the bottom, metal band at the top of the section, and a metal band at the bottom of the barrel. As we unscrew it, we'll see something that reminiscent of the time, an aerometric filler, but it can be removed. You can use cartridges, again, that very small opening that Sheaffer kept with and I think still uses today. So it's an interesting evolution and bringing back some vintage styles. After this one, they brought back the Balance and the Balance 2, and we've looked at that in a previous video. I'll give you a link to that. But it's an interesting company. One of the things that minimizes my engagement in it is they're mostly all very stiff nibs, but we're going to write with some of these and see how they look. So you may ask, how do these pens post? And these Radite pens from the 20s just post very, very shallow. Probably one of the reasons why that end of the cap had gotten broken on a couple of these, that people may have forced the cap on. And they make for a very long pen, you know, almost 7 inches in length. Or for those that use a different measurement system, about over 170 millimeters in length. So that's the design that they were. The No Nonsense and the Connoisseur pen post relatively deeply and can work as a pen that you post and write with while posted. It's interesting how the design evolved and changed. And yes, Sheaffer made these pens in many form factors, and here's that one with a ring at the top for putting a lariat through. And this is a 325. This one is very easy to read the engravings on it, which is one of the nice things about Sheaffer pens is the engravings have survived, a testament of Radite being a very stable and strong material. Let's take off the cap. Just a hair over one turn, and we'll see a nib. Again, that 325 is there. And for those that may have forgotten, $3 and a 25-year warranty. And that same comb feed on the back. So just to show you another example of the form factor and how Sheaffer made many, many different models. This is the Sheaffer 530 disassembled. So we have the feed removed from the section, the nib. I've cleaned everything up. I've checked the operation of the lever fill, and it works very well. Yeah, this was the patent design simplistic lever. Works very well. Yeah, I've cleaned up the cap a little bit. There wasn't much to clean up on this. I think I've cleaned this up a few times in the past. And one of the things that always amazes me about vintage pens is the simplistic feed. I mean, that's just a nice channel, a couple grooves in it that go right up to the nib. We have this comb feed, but those channels don't connect between where the ink is and where these comb cutouts are on the feed, so I'm not really certain what their function was. I mean, if you look at some of the Noodler ebonite feeds, you can open up channels and stuff to produce more flow. Here's that beautiful nib. I mean, Sheaffer did nice simplistic nibs. A lot of the vintage people did. And it's labeled with the price and the warranty. $5 and a 30-year warranty, made in USA. I mean, that was a real key element. And with a lot of Sheaffers in this time frame, that nib is fairly stiff. I'm having trouble over the camera with all these parts. The other thing that the Sheaffer did was they really labeled their pens well. So that's the W.A. Sheaffer Pen Company that they registered. And there's a bunch of pen dates, 1908, 1912, and a bunch of 1914. That kind of puts the pen in a certain era. Based on everything I've studied, I would put this pen in the early to mid 20s, maybe a little bit later because of the 530, but it has the straight clip on it with a nice ball at the end, and they changed that to a little bit of a hump, and they flattened out the ball in the latter parts of the 1920s. If you're going to work on vintage nibs, you need something like this, which is like a knockout block. So most vintage pens, at least from my experience, you really can't pull out the nib and feed, so you find the right opening here. Then you get a metal rod to just gently tap out the feed and nib. And this has become invaluable. You can build your own. You don't need to buy one, or you can go to like Pandemonium, I think, has them. But that's an essential tool. So the next stage is putting a new sack in here. So I just find a sack size that slips in and out. A little bit of a snug fit, but not too snug. And the way that barrel is done, the sack will go all the way to the back, so I trim it. I trimmed about a 1/4 inch off the end of this. I'm going to put a little bit of wood glue here, let it dry for a day, and then put a coating of shellac over the top of it, and we're ready to go. The sack has been attached. So I put a little bit of shellac there at the seam and a little bit up. To me, that just kind of seals anything that may be there, so it's going to be a nice airtight seal, and it provides some stability for the latex sack. We're going to now insert it into the pen barrel. I have it nice and talked. And I like to keep the nib aligned with the lever because that's, to me, makes it easier to fill. It's a nice tight fit, so we'll put it in place, and there it is. It's ready to write with. It's nice to have a good book when you're looking at some pens. So I bought this book for a very reasonable price from Pandemonium at a pen show. But much to my displeasure, it's a Sheaffer book, and it doesn't even talk about the connoisseur. There's only 2 pages on pens in the 1920s, and here's one ad that shows the flat top Lifetime with a dot at the top of the cap in a nice black and white color. There's no written mention of the connoisseur, but they do show a few examples, and this is of the model that I have because it has Sheaffer in script and the cap band. Here's a book I bought in the 90s at the Fountain Pen Hospital in New York City, and I find this book to still be a very good reference. Here's some flat tops in the book, and it does show those two colors of jade radite, which I have. And then it shows in 1927, as we pan up, we'll see it has that clip that's a little bit lower in the cap, which is a way to delineate the earlier models from the later models in the 20s. What ink to use? Well, I haven't used this one for a while. I certainly do have a lot of it. 350 milliliters, quite a bit of ink. Bought it on Amazon for under $20. Needless to say, we don't fill from the bottle. Be quite difficult. Here's the color card. Bring in some more light. So, to me, it's a blue. Kind of on the dark side. And there actually is a little bit of sheen in it when you lay it down pretty good. And when you do chromatography, it's blue. Not much else you can say about it. So these are the three pens I have inked up. Nice black pens. The middle one is a fairly slim black pen. I think a squirrel in North Dakota might like that pen. So we're going to start with this kind of oversized Lifetime one. Again, the cap is about 1 1/3 turns to get off. It fits nice in the hand. It's a light pen, which a lot of ebonite pens are light. Not a pen I would post, as we talked about earlier. Beefy section will give you those dimensions, and you don't feel those threads. I mean, you know, you're off the section, but you can hold it anywhere. And a pretty big flare out at the bottom. Let's see how the nib puts ink down. This is a nice, stiff, manifold nib. It's 14 karat, but it just makes it look nice. So I think this is a great everyday writer. It's very consistent. Puts down a decent patch of ink. Not overly wet, but not overly dry, just right. So that's the first of the pens that we're going to look at. So this is the 531. We'll take off the cap. And again, we're not going to post it. This section is a little smaller, a little thinner. We'll give you those dimensions, but you can hold it anywhere. It feels the same. It's just a smaller, thinner version of the larger Lifetime pen. So this nib is much wetter, very, very smooth. It's a completely different writer than the bigger pen. And that's one of the things that I've noticed in my vintage is the smaller nibs I most of the time like better than the bigger nibs. In Waterman's, they're more flexible. And in this case, it's certainly a nice wet writer. More of a modern style nib than the nib in the larger Lifetime model. The connoisseur just feels different in the hand. It is precious resin. I'm going to call it that. I don't really know what plastic it is. I'm certain it's injection molded, but it could have been turned. But it weighs much more, as we saw the comparison of the weights when the 3 pens were put together before writing. The cat comes off in just a little over 1 turn. This fits fine in the hand also. That section is a little bit smaller than the Lifetime, but a little bit bigger than the 530 model. You don't need to post it, but you can if you want, and it doesn't really change the balance too much. Like I said, this one in the No Nonsense seemed to post okay. I mean, this nib is even wetter than the 530 nib, and it is actually very, very, very smooth. I would say it's in that modern nib range. I need to keep the nib on the paper. It has a little bit of softness to it, but it's certainly not a nib I would flex on a regular basis. So we've gone from this manifold nib in the Lifetime to more of a medium style nib in the 5-30, and then to a even wetter and wider nib in the Connoisseur. I read where the back sometimes they put the nib size in it, and when I look at it, it kind of looks like a fine nib, but it certainly writes like a medium nib. So I hope you've enjoyed this little history lesson on Sheaffer, particular type of Sheaffer pen, and seeing how it evolved and became a modern pen. I call it modern even though it's from 1990. So thank you for watching. May you find some great pens to write with, or just one pen that you love. Put some ink in it and put that ink on paper and be amazed at what you can produce. So we've reached the end. Have a great day, have a great life, enjoy everything. No reason to waste time not enjoying. Whatever you're doing, enjoy it. We're going to say bye until the next video. Ink works nice in this Connoisseur pen.